Good morning. Good to see you guys and good to be together. We are continuing in neighboring and focusing on what it means to be a neighbor and how the way of Jesus impacts how we serve and how we treat those around us. It's been a good, we're kind of at that midpoint. So we talked in the first one about how Jesus identified who our neighbor is. And last week looked at what hospitality means in turning strangers into friends and friends into family, as we love well and are hospitable people. Today, we're going to talk about tending our property and looking at our property. Some of you, and think about how you live right now, or maybe how you lived growing up. Some of you lived like the rural life, right, where you have more animal neighbors than people neighbors. It's often, for me, I live in Little Rock, I live south of here, and it's often where I will walk out, like I walked out the other night. My neighbor, it's my mom and dad, cool neighbors to have, right? And I was walking over to say hi, and there was just a deer in my front yard, like, you're not supposed to be here. It's kind of how he looked at me, and I'm like, you're not supposed to be here, and he's like, I was here first, and so off he ran. But I thought, this is such a, cool life. Where in my front yard are animals and backyard, and I have more animal neighbors, much more, than people neighbors. Some of you live in a different way. You live in maybe more of a suburban thing where you have maybe like little plot. You have your little plot, and then your neighbor has their little plot, and right next door. And or maybe you're in one of the more recent developments that are really squish plots. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like where you and your neighbor could flip a coin and decide who mows this strip of lawn that you share, right? And so there's plots like that. And then some of you are maybe apartment dwellers or duplex dwellers, and your neighbors, you say hi by pounding the wall or, hitting the ceiling or the floor. But it doesn't matter whether you walk a quarter mile through a gravel road, or if you might have just a fence with a neighbor on the other side, or you might just have a wall or a ceiling. The actual thought of a neighbor is that there's somebody right on the other side of a boundary, whether it's a real physical boundary or even just an invisible boundary line. And today I want to talk about what it means to be a good neighbor, okay? Not like a State Farm neighbor, but like an actual good, what it means to be a good neighbor. Because, and I want to take this more metaphorically, I don't mean that your responsibility is only to the people you live by, but I want you to just think about your own life as your home, and think about the person next door as, metaphorically, as a neighbor, as a person in your world. And what does it mean to be a good neighbor? And we're going to do this by reading through one passage from the book of Galatians in the New Testament. Now, that was a book that the Apostle Paul wrote. He was somebody who went throughout the non-Jewish world telling people about the way of Jesus and starting churches. And then he wrote several letters that became part of the Bible, several letters to churches telling them about how to follow the way of Jesus, how to engage in healthy conflict with each other, how to support and love each other well. And he addressed some things because that it didn't take long for the church to find out that wherever humans are gathered together, there's trouble to sort out. And he had to address some things and also to encourage them to keep doing the good things. So this is in Galatians 6, verses 1 through 5. He was writing to a church in Galatia. And he says, brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourself, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens. And in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks they're something when they're not, they deceive themselves. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one should carry their own load. I think there's a lot in here that relates to following after Jesus and being a good neighbor. And I would love it if we just took a moment to pray and then walk back through this piece by piece. Will you pray with me? Father, I thank you for your word and your words of life. We're hungry to hear from you. And Lord, I'm so encouraged that every day when I want to hear your words of life, I can do that. I can open Scripture. I can see your words. And I pray that your Spirit would make them alive today and that they would make a difference, that they would matter to all of us as we listen and as we seek to not just hear your word, but to do what it says. We pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, so I'm going to walk back through that and think about what it means to be a good neighbor based on this passage. And the first thing I see is that to help out, that your neighbor's property line is also yours, okay? And we see that in the very first part, verses 1 and 2, where it says, brothers and sisters, if someone's caught in a sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourself, or you may be tempted, and carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. So this verse starts actually with a brother or a sister stuck. They're stuck. And which isn't the time to kick someone while they're down, or to point out how you're not stuck, even though they are. Our response, those of us that follow the Spirit of Jesus, that walk in the way of Christ, should be to gently restore that person. In other words, out of love, we do our best to help them get their eyes back on Jesus, to trust in the grace of God, and to walk with Jesus through what they're stuck in. It says that we have to be careful that we aren't tempted in some way as we help them. Kind of like if your friend's rig is stuck in the sand and you say, well, I have a tow package on my car. You want to be careful that you're not the person that gets stuck while you're trying to help them out. And here's a way this actually happened to me at a concert. I was at a concert where we were all enjoying the music, and it was what's called general admission, which means there's no seats. You just stand and enjoy yourself. But it was really rocking as a young person, and we were having a lot of fun. So you don't just stand like this. Everybody's moving. And this guy fell down. And he's getting stomped on and hurt, and all I'm thinking is, we got to help this guy. He's just down there like I see this hand. So we all try and help him, and I thought, well, I can get down there and really help him. So I got low, and as I pulled him up, I realized I wasn't as strong as I thought. So in pulling him up, he got up, but I just went right back down and traded spots with him. And then I was the one who was getting stepped on. And I was the one just trying to cover my head and hold a hand up like, please, someone save me. And they did. And after I got stepped on plenty of times, and I stood up and I said, okay, this area is officially not for me. I'm going back there. And I did. I just kind of went back there and kind of like tended to my bruises and said, I'll just enjoy the music back here. But the thought being is that we have to consider who we are when we're trying to help, okay? And especially like I have friends who they had struggled with addiction, and in serving God, they wanted to really help and reach out to people, especially people that were in the same past they were. But what they found is that they were at a place where it became a temptation to them to try and help those that were struggling in addiction, and that what they needed more was God to build them up, okay? So hopefully you understand that when this is saying, be careful that you're not tempted. There's moments where we're tempted and thinking we're doing the right thing, and we have to guard ourselves. But the point of this is that we are to carry each other's burdens. For the most part, it's saying help out. Do what you can. When we see our brother or sister struggling, we remember that, hey, they're my neighbor. And to be a good neighbor, we help out when we can, which isn't to say it isn't their responsibility. It simply means that love cares not only for its own needs, but the needs of others. I'll help in the way I can. So a good question to ask is this: Am I my brother's keeper? Now, this is a phrase that was coined in a really negative way. And this goes back to Genesis 4. So let me give you a little history on this thought of being a brother's keeper. So have you heard this phrase? Being a brother's keeper? Okay. So this was coined by an actual brother. So Adam and Eve, first humans, had their identity in who God was. As sons and daughters of God, they decided to trust in their own way and do things their way. The one way God said don't live is the way they chose to live. They used to live in a place that was called the Garden of Eden. It represented perfect unity with God. And they were commanded to leave the garden. Anyway, as they left, they're doing their best to continue to live because they're on earth. And they had these two boys named Abel and Cain. And they brought offerings to God. Basically, the way that Abel offered things to God was pleasing. The way Cain offered things to God was not, okay? And Cain became very envious and jealous of Abel, and he killed his brother, okay? He killed his brother. And so God speaks to Cain and says, where's your brother? I mean, knowing full well. And then this is what This is what God also did with Adam and Eve, is where are you? Knowing full well that they were hiding in shame, he comes to Cain and says, where is your brother? Knowing full well what he's done. And Cain says, like, what is it to me? Am I my brother's keeper? Like, am I supposed to keep track of him? That's on him. And then, we know that the Lord says to him, what have you done? Like, his blood's crying out from the ground. And what you see is that man is constantly struggling in jealousy and envy and anger and fighting from the very beginning of time. So it's nothing new. But I want you to think about that word for a moment. Am I my brother's keeper? So what he was saying is, hey, his life's his and mine's mine. Okay? And in one sense, I want you to think about that. Are you your brother's keeper? Are you your brother's keeper? Now, in one sense, we can't be the absolute keeper of anybody, right? Like, we can't be responsible for everyone else's lives. If you try, you'll be miserable. We ultimately also can't keep everyone safe or in perfect health. But we are our brother's keeper in the sense that we don't do things to hurt them. We care for them. We protect them. We have their interest in mind, and we have their heart in mind. So this, of course, includes obviously not living like Cain did, which was being jealous and covetous to the point that he turned to violence. But I'm sure many of you have experienced the same kind of violence in your hearts towards people. Jealousy or anger that manifests in talking ill of people, or outburst or slander or arrogance or arguing. And in other words, like basically what social media is every day, right? But what does that come out of? It comes out of, instead of being our brother's keeper, letting who they are or what they have make us mad to the point of gossip or outbursts or hurt. But we're our brother's keeper when we keep them well in our words and our actions, like not entertaining gossip about others, not tearing others down, and be willing to give people the benefit of the doubt, being willing to care, being willing to listen, being willing to confront what we have to, loving well. We're also our brother's keeper even more so. Like, I think that's just mankind's responsibility to be our brother's keeper, but more so as followers of Jesus, because we're his church. We're united in love. We have one heart and one purpose. We're to be there for each other in ways that build up and ways that warn. In fact, in 1 Thessalonians 5, 13 through 15, this was another piece of scripture Paul wrote to a church. He encouraged them, and therefore encourages us, to live in peace with each other. And we urge you, brothers and sisters, warn those who are idle and disruptive, encourage the disheartened, help the weak, be patient with everyone. Make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always strive to do what's good for each other and for everyone else. You even see in this passage that Paul is saying, be your brother's keeper, and there's certain seasons to do certain things. Imagine if, let me mix these around for a minute. Warn those who are weak, encourage the idle and disruptive, be patient with the disheartened, encourage like if you mix it up, some of these get really bad really quick. But why they're set up the way they are is that when somebody's disheartened, what do they need? They need encouragement. When somebody's weak, what do they need? They need strength. When somebody's being idle or disruptive, they need warned. And all these things, there's a way to be a brother's keeper. To say, my neighbor and I, we share a property line. And their life is theirs, but I'm not only supposed to be about my own interests, but others. Therefore, I'll do what I can to be a brother's keeper, to care for them. The second thing in here is in Galatians 6:3, and that's that your neighbor's pain could have been yours, so be kind. Galatians 6:3 says, if anyone thinks there's something when they're not, they deceive themselves. And this is a sobering truth. When I see a friend in a tough spot, here's the sobering truth: that could have been me. And I've been in rough spots too before. So I know that could have been me. There's a reason that this is so important to remember. One, if you don't remember this, your heart can grow cold towards others. Almost where when you see somebody in pain, you think, well, they deserve to be stuck. They're the ones that dug their own hole. But then secondly, your heart not only grows cold, it starts to deceive you. Well, I would never be stuck like that. And we know pride comes just before a fall. Now, in Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 10, I want you to hear this great passage. It says that two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Great thing that applies from this passage is this, don't, especially for me, like, don't be the one that judges people so harshly that I would never help them up. I think, well, they just deserve to be down. Or that I end up being, if I end up judging people like that over and over and over again, do you know what ends up happening? You're alone when you fall. Pity the person who falls and has no one to help them up. Pity the person who falls and has no one there to help them up. So I found a great solution to this, okay? And it's to live on my knees. Here's why I say this. And there's four reasons that are great to live on my knees. One, it reminds me to not see myself as higher than anyone else. So in other words, it's this posture of humility. Man, I live on my knees. Two, if my friends fall, I'm already down there to encourage them because I'm already down on my knees. Third, it keeps me seeking God, praying every day, remembering that he's the one that gives me strength and that his grace will empower me. And fourth, if I do fall, I'm already halfway there, so it's cool. It doesn't hurt nearly as bad. Hopefully you understand what I'm saying, though, right? And that's to keep that heart of humility, knowing, man, when somebody's struggling, what they need most is a friend. And I know that I might be that person if it wasn't God's grace working in me right now. So what can I do to help that person get their eyes back on God? And that leads to this powerful third component. Your neighbor's lawn is better if you mow yours. Your neighbor's lawn is better if you mow yours, this is about taking ownership for your own life. Galatians, the last part, verses 4-5 says, each one should test their own actions, then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else, for each one should carry their own load. We now have an issue. This verse is seemingly contradicting itself. Like we have this dichotomy. It's saying, hey, you should carry each other's load. Hey, you should carry your own load. Well, which is it? I guess the answer is yes, or it's both. They're both right. It's what's called a dichotomy. There's something true about both, and we have to sort it out, because either that or Paul has just written too many letters, and he doesn't know what he's saying anymore, but we know that's not what it is. He's saying, hey, you have to help carry others' loads, but hey, you're supposed to carry your own load. Here's what it's about. You can help shoulder your brother's burden, but you can't carry their burden for them. In fact, a great illustration, of course, is our good friend Frodo and Samwise. Frodo is tasked, fantasy geeks go there really quick, and you gave me the open door. Nobody stopped me. So you were like, I didn't know to stop you, I would have. Okay, so in Lord of the Rings, Frodo, this humble hobbit, was tasked with taking the evil ring of power and throwing it, in the fires from which it was forged. And everybody's supposed to basically stand with him to the end. People keep failing him. Actually, you know what? That story doesn't prove that good people succeed. It proves that all of mankind fails, and ultimately the providence of God wins. So next time you watch that, it's true. But there's this point where Frodo feels he can't go on another moment. And his good and steady friend Samwise says, I can't carry your burden for you, but I can carry you. And he picks him up and goes up the mountain. I'm like, that dude is awesome. Because that's a picture of of being a neighbor to each other, is you have to bear your own load. You're responsible for your life, but my responsibility out of love is to shoulder you so you can shoulder your load. Okay, and so in that sense, yes, we bear each other's burdens as each of us is responsible to bear our own burden. And secondly, in this last part, is we carry our own load. So both are right. You can't shoulder your whole brother's life, but you can carry it by carrying him. And so in the same way, it's a blessing. Isn't it a blessing to have those around you who not only you will support and encourage, but who will strengthen you? But here's the truth. At the end of the day, we're all responsible for one person, and it is ourselves, okay? The best way that you can help your neighbor is to take care of yourself. In fact, you add value to others by being a Christ-honoring, Spirit-filled, God-centered version of yourself. If I mow my lawn and I take care of it, there's less weeds to blow around. There's less nasty stuff to get on my neighbors. If I take care of my garbage well and make sure it gets out to the street, there's less to fall on their property. If I take care of who I am, the value of their house actually goes up. How many of you live in an HOA? Okay, a few of you. It's fun, isn't it? The meetings, the rules, no, really, like, there's a positive reason HOAs exist. And what it is they want to guard community and protect the value of each other's homes. That's why they say, if you move in here, we have rules, like you can't have a water slide that goes out of your third-story window into your neighbor's yard. Why not? That sounds fun. See, some of you are like, oh, good idea. Why is that rule there? Because they want to protect the safety and the value of the community, right? And those homes go up when you take care of your own. In the same way, one of the best things I can do for your life is to seek Jesus for his grace to change me to be the best version of who I am, so that I can care for you, love you well, be kind, be godly, encourage when I'm supposed to. So the best thing you can do for your neighbor is be the best version of yourself. It's like these guys. I got to tell you this story. This is so neat. I worked out once. It was awesome. And yeah, it was cool. It was actually like at a CrossFit place. I did this for a while. It was really fun. And they get into it, and they do what's called a WOD, which just means a workout of the day. So every day there's these things, and people are like jumping on boxes and lifting huge like balls and slamming them against the wall. And I'm like, this is fun. This is kind of like, feels like we're all like these paleo creatures, like getting ready for battle. Like, it's not like the gym where you're just doing this. Like, people are like grabbing stuff and doing stuff. And I'm like, this is awesome. Like, they're getting out maces. And I'm like, this is like war. So I'm pumped because it must feed something in me that's like, yes, I'm bred for some battle, which really is standing in line at Fred Meyer. That's battle enough. That's all I face. I don't know. But we're working out. And it gets this part where everybody's got their own load. And this guy's doing some serious weights because he's a bigger, stronger guy. And he bit off quite a bit. So he's going and he's lifting. And everybody gets done with their set of reps. And this guy's got a few more and he's struggling. And this guy next to him goes, come on, you've got it. And he goes, oh, and he does another, and everybody else is finished. But this guy starts like feeding him, like, you got this. You've only got 5 more. And now you got 4. And he's just one of the other guys working out. And he got done. And the guy's getting pumped. And he finishes. And everybody goes, yeah, because it's kind of like, yes, we can all take a break. And so we do. And afterwards, we're all sitting there kind of like sweaty and breathing hard. And that guy looks over at him. And he said, man, that was awesome. Thanks for getting me through that. Like, thanks for pushing me through that moment. I thought all he did was yell at him. Like, he did all the work, and yet the other guy totally did something in carrying that burden to help him get through that moment, okay? And so what you see is that guy still had to finish. He was responsible to do his WOD. It was all on him. However, that guy could cheer him on and make him so much stronger, but that guy could only cheer him on because he had carried his own load. If he was over there gritting and working, or if he had said, well, I'm not doing this, but I guess I'll cheer him on, like, that doesn't work. But man, he carried his own load, did his thing, and then was there to cheer him on. It was the coolest thing. I want to switch from those guys to Peter in Scripture. Peter was one of the original disciples of Jesus, followed him for 3 years, said powerful things like, I'd never deny you. If everyone else leaves you, I never will. He was also the one that is known as somebody who denied even knowing Christ, denied him 3 times. He left his side. And there's this moment where Peter gets, we call it reinstated. In other words, Jesus offers forgiveness and for him to get his eyes back on him. And this is after the crucifixion, after the resurrection of Christ. They're having breakfast and talking, and we're in John. If you're taking notes, you can write down John 21, 15 through 22. It says, when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The 3rd time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus was asked him the 3rd time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. Hey, this is a heavy moment. He's actually saying, do you truly love me? And then he said, I tell you all these things. When you were young, you kind of just went your own way. When you're older, you'll be led to somewhere you don't want to go. He's telling him, you'll die a painful death. And we find that Peter, too, was crucified. And as tradition says, that he asked to be crucified upside down because he did not feel worthy to be crucified the same way that Christ did. And we know that Peter, he faced a painful death where his arms were outstretched and he was led to a place he did not want to go. But he said to him, follow me. And then in verse 20, to continue, Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved, that was John, was following them. This was the one who had leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, Lord, who is going to betray you? When Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what's that to you? You must follow me. And in doing so, Jesus said the most freeing thing for Peter's life and for ours. Peter was at a very crucial moment where he says, you're going to follow me, and sometimes life's going to be really hard on you. It's going to be a burden, but you must follow me. And Peter's first response was to look around for somebody to say, but what about that guy? What about him? And Jesus does the powerful, freeing thing in saying, he's not your concern. I am. I'm your concern. You must follow me. You must not worry about him and what he's going to experience and compare it to your life. Your life is in my hands, and you follow me. So it seems harsh, but it's the most freeing thing in the world. I know when I face a challenge, I could be tempted to say this, and maybe you've said it. I know I have. God, why me? What about them? The comparing trap is quick, and it's easy, and it's destructive because we begin to despise others for what they're not going through or what they're going through, or covet others for what they have or how easy they might have it. In fact, there might even be somebody that you think, man, they've got it so easy, and you don't even know. In fact, I can think of people in this room that they've got things on their shoulders so hard to bear. And you might look and think, man, look how easy their life is. Look at how together they got it. And if you knew how hard it was, it would break your heart. But that's the thing is when we're in pain, when we've got a burden, we want to look around and say, well, why is it so easy for so-and-so? What about me? We just don't even know. But that's only half the story, because when we're focused on somebody else, how are we going to get through what we're facing? Temptation comes. In fact, maybe some of you in moments that have been a hard burden for you have felt alone, or you felt ignored, or unimportant. And these things can become crippling because it leads to pity and then a lot of anger. And basically, eventually what it means is you're an island. Nobody wants to hang out with people that we're angry with or that we're jealous of or covetous of. So we end up on an island alone saying, nobody has it as bad as I do. But what if we heard that strong voice of Jesus saying, don't worry about what they have to face or not face. What is that to you? Follow me. You must follow me. And why Jesus says that he's not saying like tough it out and prove you're strong. He's saying don't look for an excuse or somebody to compare yourself to. You'll always find easier and hard things on your left and right. Instead, come to the burden bearer. If you've got a burden that hard, don't compare yourself. Don't say, what about this? What about this person? Come to the burden bearer and say, you said that if I'm weak and heavy laden and burdened, that I come to you and I find rest for my soul. What we do is we follow him, and we follow him into new life. We follow Christ into new life. He intended for the church to be this community of people that cheers each other on the whole way. But at the end of the day, you're responsible for taking your burden and putting it in the hands of Jesus and saying, it's you alone that's going to do something different in me. And if I wait for the right cheering section, or if I look to blame others, or if I look for somebody to say, what about them? What about them? I'm going to waste my life. But if instead I say, this is what's crushing me, and you called yourself burden bearer, you said, come to me weak and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest, and here it is. And man, when he helps you with that burden, then you say, okay, I have enough strength to cheer one more person on. Even if your path is hard, Christ will walk it with you. For some of you, this was the hardest season of your life, and for others of you, this is the easiest season you've experienced. And then most of us, like those are maybe 2 people in the room, the rest of us fall on some spectrum, right? But the answer is the same. Christ calls us to trust him with our burdens. And as we find strength and we find help and we find hope, then we look around for who the next person is that we can strengthen as well. Not kick while they're down or why do they have it so easy when I have it so hard, Lord? Simply rush to that burden bearer. Find strength and then be strength. Just like a couple weeks ago, remember when Jesus was talking about, who our neighbors are? And what he showed us is that the least important question is, who is my neighbor? And the more important one is, who is being a neighbor to the one in need? Jesus always flips it to our own hearts. He always holds up a mirror. And in this way, don't get stuck on what about him or what about her. Instead, focus on what is that even to you? You must follow Christ. So friends, let us first of all be good at bearing up one another's burdens. Life is hard enough without adding to the struggle. But secondly, let us never think that we're above helping others or needing help. And then let's avoid that trap of comparison and carry our own load to Jesus. And I'm just going to ask 2 questions for you that we'll answer during this time of worship. Worship team, you can come on up. I appreciate that. Here's the first one is, say, God, here, I would love for you to respond in prayer and honesty to God and say, God, here is my load. Can you carry this with me? Can this be something that you carry? And then secondly, along with that, is to also be able to say, God, who can I bear up with and give strength to this week? Who can I bear up with and give strength to this week? You'd be surprised. I find that I can still be a good burden bearer and a good friend even when something's heavy on my shoulders. It can be done. And really what that's saying is I'm not going to give up. I know God's going to help me. And as he's helping me, I'll be the best help I can to someone else. So friends, a lot of you, there's just something heavy on your shoulders. There's something that is tough to carry. But it's impossible to carry alone. And you weren't designed to. You were designed to trust Christ, to let him carry it with you and for you.